This episode of Trifles is brought to you by listeners like you, who choose to support us on Patreon for as little as $1 a month. Go to patreon.com/trifles to learn more.
Welcome to Trifles, a weekly podcast about the Sherlock Holmes stories.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Yes, the lip was twisted, the soldier was blanched, and the men were dancing, but there are so many other details to pick apart in the stories.
Pray, be precise as to details.
You know the plots, but what about the minutiae? Have you ever stopped to wonder about whatever happened to Inspector Gregson? Or Mrs. Hudson's husband? Or of Holmes's early clients?
You are very inquisitive, Mr. Holmes.
It is my business to know what other people don't know.
Scott Monty and Burt Wolder will have the answers to these questions and more in Trifles.
The game's afoot.
Episode 446, Untangling the Skein. Hello, and welcome to Trifles, the Sherlock Holmes podcast where we get into the minutiae in the Sherlock Holmes stories. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Burt Wolder.
Burt, how is your skein these days?
My skein? Well, my skein is fine. You know, the problem is you buy these skeins, and then what you have to do is open them all up and then make balls of yarn at them, and you have to make sure the tension is exactly right. And then, you know, you sit there with your ball of yarn made, and you have the whole thing wound up, and you don't have your knitting needles. So you say, "Watson, the needle," and then no one answers. And after a while, you go out and buy a sweater, which saves you a lot of time in the end.
Was Quick Watson the needle actually something related to knitting?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, I thought everyone knew that.
Oh.
Mrs. Hudson taught Holmes how to knit. And in his gratitude, he gave her his monograph on 150 different forms of cross-stitching.
Oh, I can just imagine those quiet evenings home at 221B Baker Street in the study by the coal fire and the gentle click-clacking of the knitting needles.
Yeah.
It's almost enough to put one to sleep.
Yeah.
Just like this show.
And then, you know, Holmes he had a really good handle for, making quilts and things like that. But he always put VR in them somehow. And I don't know, it didn't really look right.
That meant they were very ready to be worn.
That's right. Very random, yeah.
We are ready to begin this episode. It is one of those Mr. Sherlock Holmes the Theorist episodes where we take a piece of Sherlockian scholarship and discuss it with you. Sometimes we look at scholarship that is old and buried and inaccessible. Other times we look at more modern versions. And in that case, I should say in this case, it is the latter. We have a piece from Matt Hall. From the Sherlock Holmes Journal, Volume 37, Number 2, from the Sherlock Holmes Society of London. He looks at the origins of a study in Scarlet. It's a fascinating piece and a remarkable discovery, and one that we are happy to share with you here. Just a note, if you'd like to support the show, if you like what we do here, if you'd like to help us continue doing what we do, your support would be most helpful. You can do that in a couple of ways. One, we do have a Patreon presence. You can find us at patreon.com/trifles. And we also have a presence on Substack, trifles.substack.com. In both cases, you get access to additional material that the general public does not get. And in the case of Patreon, we have thank you gifts at certain levels. So you might want to check that out and see which platform works for you. But either way, we appreciate having your support. And we also like hearing from you. Your comments are generally supportive as well. Well, the good ones, at least. That kind of gives us the oomph the mental and spiritual fortitude to keep doing what we do. So if you'd like to email us, you can email us at trifles@ihearofsherlock.com or just comment on the entry at sherlockholmespodcast.com. We love hearing from you, love hearing what you're up to. And if you happen to suggest a topic that we use on the show, we'll send you a prize in gratitude. So do what you can. Well, Bert, you were kind enough to open up the pages of the latest issue of the Sherlock Holmes Journal. And here you found something that is remarkable and destined for the eyes and ears, in particular, of Trifles listeners. What is it?
It is, as you mentioned in the intro, really an amazing sort of discovery. And it's a great tip of the deerstalker to Matt Hall, but also to the idea that, there is still much more to be found in the world of Sherlock Holmes. And if you read enough of these essays in the Baker Street Journal and the Sherlock Holmes Society Journal and in other publications, including some of the great historical ones like Baker Street Miscellany and so on and so forth, you could come to the conclusion, it's all been done, hasn't it? There's really nothing more to find. And here's an example of something that's really significant that's just been found now, and it's a great story.
It is a great story. And, I think it's just evidence that there's always something left to be mined by Sherlockian scholars. And it completely depends on where you're coming from. And in Matt Hall's case, he's coming from Sydney, Australia. He is a scientist working here in the United States, but he is a native Australian. So he had access to the it's the Sydney,
the State Library of New South Wales, in Sydney, Australia.
Right. 4 letters from the 1880s that were written by Arthur Conan Doyle. Well, how did these letters wind up in Sydney, of all places, and what did they contain? Well, that is what his piece looks at.
Yep. And so he begins right away, and to that point, just so I don't forget it, this is an echo of an observation that Ira Matetsky has made several times to the irregular community. Ira, as he's traveled around the country, has spent time when he's in particular cities, mostly for the first time. He'll think about where the local universities are, and is there a library, and might he be able to have a visit just to go over and see what's there. And over the years, Ira has turned over some remarkable things in his discoveries. Well, this is a case like that. And so Matt begins untangling the skein by reminding us sort of the status of what we know about Study in Scarlet. He says, when A Study in Scarlet was published in late 1887, the story had already been on quite a journey. Conan Doyle wrote it over the course of about 6 weeks in March and April of 1886 while he was in Southsea. It was submitted to several publishers, accepted by Ward Locke, but it was held over. It was accepted in 1886, held over a year before it came to the public in 1887. There's no holograph manuscript, but there are some primary documents and commentary capturing the origins of the story. Conan Doyle himself, in his memoir, Memories and Adventures, reflected on the genesis of Holmes. Conan Doyle said, "What should I call the fellow? I still have the leaf of a notebook with various alternative names. First it was Sherringford Holmes, then it was Sherlock Holmes. And then, of course, he conceived of Watson. And so I had my characters and wrote my Study in Scarlet." Well, this leaf to which Conan Doyle refers is commonly known as the Sherlock Holmes birth certificate. And it's a single sheet that refers to Sherringford Holmes and Ormond Sacker, who became Watson, of 221B Upper Baker Street. And it sketches out the famous comparison to Dupin by Edgar Allan Poe. And, there you are. It's been reproduced a lot in the serialization of Memories and Adventures and elsewhere. And then Matt takes us to another artifact the South Sea Notebook.
Now, before we jump to the South Sea Notebook, I just want to make an aside here. This birth certificate with Sherlock Holmes and Ormond Sacker. There's a wonderful side reference to that in the film by Gene Wilder, Sherlock Holmes' smarter brother, where he plays a character, the youngest brother of Sherlock Holmes. He's known as Sigerson Holmes, and which, of course, is a reference to Holmes's hiatus alias, Sigerson, the Norwegian explorer. And Marty Feldman plays his trusty assistant, Orville Sacker. So it was for those who were tuned in to see the names of an alternative Holmes and an alternative Watson. It was very cute. But we go on to this notebook that you mentioned from South Sea. This is a 10-page notebook. Or excuse me, it is there's an artifact on page 10 of the notebook, which is part of a series of notebooks that Conan Doyle kept between 1885 and 1889. And there's a fragment on page 10 that contains a title and 2 sentences of text. Crossed out is A Tangled Skein, and then written after it is A Study in Scarlet. The terrified woman rushing up to the cabmen, the 2 going in search of a policeman. John Reeves had been 7 years in the force. John Reeves went back with them. And Matt tells us that John Reeves evolved into John Rance, the constable who found the body at Lauriston Gardens. And he's got an image of this extract from the notebook, which is included in the article here. And that image and the above sentences was reproduced in John Dixon Carr's biography, The Life of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, in 1949.
Yeah, and the interesting thing about all this, Matt goes on to say, while neither of the sheets are dated, the general interpretation has been that the title of the story was originally A Tangled Skein, and that it was later renamed A Study in Scarlet. And in fact, as the various Sherlock Holmes exhibitions that have shown some of these materials have been written about in newspapers, this sort of statement has been repeated. And you can also find this in other spots. Well, the conclusion, says Matt, is entirely reasonable based on the evidence available, and no further documentary evidence exists on the genesis of A Study in Scarlet until now. And so now we get to the State Library of New South Wales. Matt tells us the State Library of New South Wales holds 4 letters from the 1880s written by Arthur Conan Doyle to Mrs. Kate Bryson, which were donated in 1966. The identity of Kate, that's something for a further article, but let's just observe that Kate and her husband Dan were friends from Conan Doyle's Edinburgh days, and most likely they had a mutual acquaintance in William K. Burton, Conan Doyle's childhood friend. So in the early 1900s, Kate marries a fellow of Swiss London, member of a Swiss London trading family, Charles Bon Bernard, and resettled in Sydney. So there's Kate coming over from Edinburgh into Sydney. The letters must have been valued by Kate, who carried them to Sydney. Following her death and following the death of her husband, the letters were offered to the State Library, where they have resided for almost 60 years. So
and
here,
finally uncovered.
Yeah, so here is friends from Conan Doyle's Edinburgh days, before South Sea, who eventually wind up in Sydney with these letters, which date back from those early times.
And here's some interesting detective work from Matt. He says, well, all 4 letters are undated. 2 are addressed from Portsea, which is the strip of land where Southsea is located. One of the two Portsea letters can be dated to 1885, while the other is likely prior to 1887, and possibly even prior to 85. And several biographers have noted the weeding of Conan Doyle's correspondence from the Bush Villas period by members of the family. And Andrew Lysette, one of his biographers, suggested that that was an attempt by Conan Doyle's sons to minimize his relationship with Louise Hawkins in the family lore. Louise Hawkins, of course, known to Conan Doyle as Toohey, would become his second wife.
His first wife.
First wife, excuse me. Because his second wife was
Jean Lecter.
Jean. That's right, Jean. So we've got, according to John Lellenberg and Dan Stasauer, who wrote Arthur Conan Doyle, A Life in Letters in 2007, they reveal a paucity of correspondence from 1885 to 1888. The letters that did nothing in the 3 years.
They did nothing in the nighttime.
Right. Well, at nighttime that lasted 3 years. So, but the Bryson letters, Matt tells us, offer insight into the formative period of Conan Doyle's writing career. The 1885 letter consists of 2 leaves with writing on both sides, and it's in very poor condition because the folding and unfolding has caused the letter to separate into 2 pieces. And there's an image of the letter as well. You can see it folded in multiple places. And, as I'm looking at this visual here, I have to imagine that Kate Bryson must have really valued this letter, because if you kept the letter folded up and stored away, it wouldn't have deteriorated to this extent. This letter must have been folded and unfolded many times as she read it and reread it. Certainly with the increased prominence of Conan Doyle as a globally acclaimed author by the time she moved off to Sydney.
Yeah. Well, now, just to recap for a second here, there's a couple of really interesting things going on here I just want to underscore to our listeners. First is, this comes from a period in Conan Doyle's life where we know very little, as Scott has just explained. The fact is that for whatever reason, either because Conan Doyle's second family wished to downplay his first family, for whatever reason, there's sort of a gap here. We don't have a lot of correspondence until this, from these years of 1885 to 1888. And the other thing I wanted to underscore is there's no transcription of the letter, but there is this full-page reproduction of it. And so what I'm going to do later is actually just sort of write it out, because you can read it in Conan Doyle's handwriting. But it's such an interesting casual letter. It's dated Station Hospital, Portsea, and he writes, "My dear Kate, I've begun many letters to you and have, then I can't really, propose some distance with them. I don't know quite what that means. And then this happens and that happens, and so I've been interrupted and I've not been able to complete the letters. And so, but this one shall be finished." And how many of us over the years, particularly in old days when we used to write letters all the time, have started a letter like that? I've been meaning to write to you, but boy, the house was on fire, and then I had to go shopping, and the dog needed to be walked, and I couldn't do it, and so it's really interesting. But anyway, the letter was written in April, May, or June 1885, and Conan Doyle, Matt tells us it can't have been written before April, because Conan Doyle in the letter makes 2 references to his engagement to Toohey, which occurred in that month. So there you are. And he also makes a reference to his intended marriage. And in closing the letter, he states, "I get married on or about the 6th of August." And then, in some really charming additional detail, Conan Doyle in the letter writes, "We correspond pretty regularly. I think she is a very good little girl. Now he's talking about Louise Hawkins, and will make a jolly partner in life. I shall keep my married household in quite as bohemian a style as my single one. And then he goes on. The latest letter could be the latest the letter could have been written, says Matt, is in June, since Conan Doyle goes on to refer to a story that's been accepted by Belgravia, but which has not yet appeared. Conan Doyle writes, I don't know when Belgravia will publish that, nor when they will pay me for it. And that story can only be the great Kindplot's Experiment, Conan Doyle's comic body swap story, which, says Matt, was published in Belgravia in July of 1885.
What a lovely snapshot into this particular time in Conan Doyle's life. You know, he's a young man. He's getting his start in the world of authorship. He's about to get married. There's so much going on under the surface here. Well, Matt tells us that he begins to, that it came from Station Hospital Portsea, which has a watermark of the coat of arms of Her Majesty's government. This was referenced in Memories and Adventures, in which Conan Doyle offers this insight into his days as a struggling doctor. A new phase of medical experience came to me about this time, for I suddenly found myself a unit in the British Army. The operations in the East drained the medical service, and it had therefore been determined that local civilian doctors should be enrolled for temporary duty of some hours a day. The terms were a guinea a day, and a number of us were tempted to volunteer where there were only a few vacancies. So this is Conan Doyle making a little coin on the side, and a guinea a day was not a bad salary.
Nice money.
Yeah. So you can see why a number of them were scrambling for the few vacancies. But he said, I've been stuck on here to look after troops, which is a very good thing, but it probably won't last long. They run short on army medicos, et cetera, et cetera. And he has a little sketch in the letter of himself in a top hat towering above 8 militiamen escorting him as a prisoner, which is funny.
Yeah, the whole thing is lovely, and he has another little anecdote here where he writes to Kate and tells her that the other night he was run in by the army as a prisoner. He was grabbed by the MPs, who seemed to think that he was sort of an Irish revolutionary, and their excuse was that he didn't know the countersign. But that cleared up, and he says, this is giving me about £12 a month. So if it lasts, it'll be a capital thing, but it's liable to terminate at any moment. And then that little sketch is Conan Doyle of himself in a top hat towering above 8 militiamen who are escorting him as a prisoner.
Yeah, but as usual, Conan Doyle has buried the lead here, because he gets to the real heart of the matter here. It's his cat's obituary. We've had a heavy blow in the shape of the death of our pet cat. She was very high-minded and independent, but jealousy was one of her failings, and when she heard my intended marriage, she looked at me reproachfully, went across the road to the Marston Lodge cat, and made arrangements as to the disposal of her property, and then came back and deliberately committed suicide by getting into the oven and allowing herself to be shut in and suffocated.
Good grief.
Oh, and he goes on about the cat.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. Calling from the back garden wall, addressing other cats from the top of the wall with much vehemence. From the respect with which her remarks were always listened to, I judged that she was considered the best orator in this quarter. Still, her tastes were refined. She was fond of botany and entomology. The first led her to carefully dig up everything which we'd planted in the garden. The second took her into strange places in pursuit of flies. But anyway, now he gets to the point.
So essentially she was a cat.
Yeah, she was a cat. But it's interesting. Before he gets to the point here, he writes, cats don't do shabby things. Oh, but there, I mustn't start moralizing or I shall bore you. So this is a very conversational letter. Yeah. Now he gets to the point, and he turns to several topics. And now he writes, A Study in Scarlet. What an excellent name for a story depending upon a murder and the interest lying in the difficulty of unraveling the facts and who the murderer is. It struck me quite suddenly, and I at once recognized it as a splendid name. I shall write it.
So this is likely the first appearance of the title of A Study in Scarlet, and possibly the only one that can be categorically dated to 1885, writes Matt. Conan Doyle indicates that the title for the story came first. In fact, it struck him quite suddenly, and he concludes by resolving to write a story about the murder. There's no mention of prior titles or drafts of a story. In fact, immediately following this extract, he states that, quote, literature is slack, I am torpid, my brain won't work, end quote. Well, I mean, who among us could not say the same thing?
Oh, me, but I can certainly say this.
But in light of this new evidence, he says, how do we rationalize the received wisdom that A Tangled Skein was the original title of the first story and was later replaced with A Study in Scarlet? Well, one possibility, writes Matt, is that the title was in fact A Tangled Skein, A Study in Scarlet, before Conan Doyle thought of a better double-barreled title. The inverted commas around A Tangled Skein suggest it was perhaps intended to be a quote in a longer title, and that it was removed from the working title rather than being replaced at a later date by A Study in Scarlet.
Well, whatever the case, it's significant that we now have proof that the title was being considered a full 12 months before Conan Doyle is believed to have put pen to paper on Holmes's first adventure.
Well, that is one remarkable piece of scholarship, I must say.
Great discovery.
Really is. To me, this is the definitive piece, because I can't imagine unearthing more letters from this time, since there are very few that exist. And you're not going to go, further back, because this was right in that time period when Conan Doyle was embarking upon a writing career.
Yeah. Now, there may be some of our listeners out there who are sitting and thinking, boy, oh boy, this was a long discussion just to get to the point of what we knew already at the outset, which was that the case is called A Study in Scarlet. Well, friends, if you are some of those people, then you have no appreciation at all for trifles.
It is, of course, a trifle, but there is nothing so important as trifles.
Please join us again next week for another installment of Trifles. Show notes are available on SherlockHolmesPodcast.com. Please subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and be sure to check out our longer show, I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, where we interview notable Sherlockians and share news of the Sherlockian world.
You've taken my breath away, Mr. Holmes.
I have a letter to send by express messenger. Mrs. Hudson! Mrs. Hudson!